Hi, I'm Ross Purnell, editor and publisher of Fly Fisherman magazine. Welcome to Loop, where we make deeper connections with the people behind the magazine. Our sponsors today are Patagonia. Patagonia is making a kick-ass pair of waders, a couple of them actually, the Expedition waders and the Traverse, both zip fronts. I've been using them for about 6 months, crawling on my hands and knees, scrabbling over rocks, bushwhacking through thorns, and still no leaks. Patagonia has redesigned the waders so that when they do leak, it's easier to repair them, and they've got a ton of functionality, so check them out. We're also sponsored by G. Loomis, American-made fly rods made in Woodland, Washington. I've been using G. Loomis rods since Steve Rajeff got me onto them 20 plus years ago. Fantastic tools, and I've got some Asquith rods and NRX Plus and IMX Pros for different situations, and they're an amazing rod. So if you enjoy this podcast, please support our sponsors, and you can support us by subscribing to the magazine. You can do that top right-hand corner of Fly Fisherman magazine or flyfisherman.com. You can also follow us on social media. On Instagram, we are at Fly Fisherman magazine. On Facebook, it's just at Fly Fisherman. And hopefully you're watching the YouTube video version of this on our YouTube channel at Fly Fisherman magazine. It is our great pleasure today to have Monte Burke with us in the studio. Monte is one of the leading writers of this century, I'd say. I follow his writings extensively. He's been a staff writer for Forbes, writes for
Garden Gun,
The Drake, a bunch of publications.
You guys occasionally.
Yes. Well, many times I have asked you, and occasionally I can get you. He's also written some amazing books. Recently, some of them fly fishing books, the Lords of the Fly, and most recently, Rivers Always Run to the Sea.
Reach the Sea. Yep.
Rivers Always Reach the Sea. And that's his, just some of his fly fishing books. He's also written a book called Leaper on Atlantic salmon. You have extensive history with Atlantic salmon. We're going to dive into that. Sowbelly, which is about the chase for World Record Largemouth Bass. And then non-fly fishing books. Fly fishing is not your whole world.
Nope.
You've had some very popular football books too.
Yep.
You tell me a little bit about the Nick Saban book?
Yeah, so that was a really fun one to do. That's probably, we're getting close to about 10 years ago, but it was just an in-depth dive on where this guy came from, what he was doing at Alabama, how he transformed the Alabama program. He didn't love all parts of it, but that's just the way it goes. I think it was a pretty objective, honest look at the guy.
Have you noticed a crossover between college football and fly fishing, or is it just that college football permeates so deeply into American culture?
There's definitely a crossover.
You can't get away from it.
I love them both, right? But I do think there's when I write college football books, they're all about coaches, right? Fourth and Goal, which is back there too, is also about a coach. Saban, I've got another one coming out in January about Pete Carroll. And so to me, there's like this, there is a similarity between these obsessed college football coaches and these kind of obsessed anglers that I write about. A big correlation. One is obsession being the main thing, but also just love of process. All of these coaches, Nick Saban in particular, I mean, they love like the minutia of everything. Like they love like designing the training meals, and they love like, the practices where they figure out how the hips of the cornerbacks work. Not too dissimilar to like, Stu Apt learning how to do a bimini twist and staying up all night and perfecting it. Stu Apt, again, trying to figure out how the best way to pole a boat, or these rod manufacturers, with these little tiny slivers of incremental sort of improvements on these rods. So there is a lot of similarity, I feel like, between the two.
So it's like a compulsive drive to like be the very best, and usually you have to get into like the very small details to do that, because everybody does 90% of the things the same. It's
Absolutely.
Really
and there's
the
also
final
like
1% that
the
counts.
costs too. I mean, the cost of like obsession is cool, right? Because it drives us to do really interesting and fun things. It animates us. Our little obsessions. My obsession with fly fishing kind of gets me out of the bed in the morning. Nick Saban's obsession with college football coaching led him to win 7 national championships. Same thing with these, the really obsessed fly anglers, but there are costs to all of these things as well. There's family time and Lords of the Fly in particular. I think I illustrate how costly some of these obsessions can be when you wreck your marriages. One guy even lost his life. I mean, there's lots of similarities, I feel like.
Yeah, it can consume your whole life.
Correct.
And fishing's like that too. There's been many stories of people that went fishing too much and end up wrecking them personally.
We've all been there. I peered over the edge, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's something to consider. Well, with you, let's go back to, I'm curious about you. You and I have run into each other several times over the years, but haven't had a chance to really have a conversation. I'm interested how you got started in fly fishing. What's your origin story?
I mean, like a lot of people, my dad was a fly angler and a hunter. He was probably more of a hunter, but he had fly rods. And my grandfather and my uncle were big time fly fishermen. So it's actually kind of like probably my grandfather who got me started. And he lived in Alabama, and we had a little family pond, which he kind of grandly called a lake. He called it Lake Tadpole. But he had all these really cool Orvis cane rods, and he would just take me out on his little John boat, and he had a little trolling motor, and he would just, we'd go up the side of the pond there, and I would cast out a little tiny Gaines popper and usually hit the back of water here and the front water here, and he didn't care. He was just, and then he would make a little brim like that. It seemed like I just caught 1,000-pound marlin. And he, at one point in his life, had started to, when he kind of retired, started to travel and fish a lot. So he had great stories from Isla Morada, catching tarpon and bonefish and occasional permit, I guess, but also Iceland and Atlantic salmon fishing and going out to Montana. So that really kind of got me going. And then at one point, I'm kind of a geographical mutt. I was born in New Hampshire, lived in Vermont, then Alabama, then North Carolina, then Alabama, then Virginia. But when we were in North Carolina, we had a farmhouse, and we had this little tiny pond behind it that was usually covered with algae, but if a slight breeze came up, it would clear off part of the pond. And I would go down there with one of those my grandfather's old Orvis cane rods, and with a leader maybe about that long, and an old bumblebee popper. I still remember the popper. And go down there and just slap it down, and every once in a while, one of these giant, 5-pound bass would hit it. And that was kind of the roots of the obsession. I got really, really into it. And then college, I went to college in Vermont, fished a bunch for trout. And then it was after college when I got just totally obsessed. And in fact, the Letort Spring Run, not too far from here, was my first sort of true love, I feel like, in this sport.
I read about that in your new book.
Yep.
The Letort stuff. I'm like, that's cool. Yeah, that's just 20 minutes from here. That's we're in the Cumberland Valley, so the Letort's the big one. Yellow Breeches is where most of the
breeches all the
pressure
time
goes. Most of my experience on the Letort is just going down there and sitting and watching and walking and trying to see a fish. It's obviously 100%. Not.
But I love, when you walk down there, there's that one place you can park, and I think there's a monument to Vince Marinaro there. Mm-hmm. And a little bit further down, there's one of Charlie Fox. And so that got me, because I always loved to read and everything. I loved history, and sort of Letort had kind of everything. It had, really, it was beautiful. It had history in it. It had difficult fish. And that to me was this combo that really, I worked in DC. I used to literally leave work, put the dog in the car at 6 o'clock. It was about a 2-hour drive. I'd get there at 8, fish from 8 to about 8:45 till it was too dark to see, and then drive home. Just for 45 minutes of that little bit of the sulfur hatch that would come off, I was totally just a junkie. It was awesome.
Yeah, was the sulfur hatch good there?
It wasn't bad. There were always a couple fish rising, and it took me forever. I think it took me 3 seasons to finally catch, I called it a 20-incher. It was probably more like an 18-incher, but I remember finally catching, a decent sized fish, and there was a guy who had, didn't know that well, but a fellow guy, and he came over afterwards in the parking lot and was like, congratulations. And I was like, yes, I'd finally done something, So it was cool. I met Ed Schenk there. I mean, I met all these, it was cool. It was very cool.
Yeah, it's the nostalgia and the history and stuff. It's almost like a church there.
It is. Unfortunately, it's pretty much all nostalgia now, but,
Yeah. This is where Vince was. This is Fox's Meadows.
Yep. And they kind of invented, modern day terrestrial fishing. It's kind of cool. They did jacids. No one really fishes jacids anymore, but every time you cast a Dave's hopper or something like that, or a beetle, you kind of owe it to those guys.
Letort hopper.
Yep.
Yeah. When I'm there, it's usually ants, crickets.
Yep.
Letort hoppers and stuff like that. Usually when it's sulfur time, I'm headed to the Juniata or somewhere else, so I could
sea fish.
Yeah. Actually catch a bunch of fish.
Right.
And I read in your book, you went there in December frequently.
I did. I used to go up there. It was sort of a tradition. I would go up there like Christmas Eve-ish sometimes. And I'd go up, and it was just miserable usually. But, most of the time, there was a weird little 2-hour window, like in the warmest part of the day sometimes when sulfurs would hatch. And it would be a really quick, but again, I was a junkie, right? I was just up there. I didn't matter that I went up there all the way just for that 2 hours, right? But I remember one memorable time there was snow falling and a sulfur hatch, and it took a little while to kind of discern which were the snowflakes and which were the sulfurs. It was so cool. It was really, really cool.
Yeah. I used to torture myself similarly and go every Super Bowl to fish the yellow breeches.
Yeah.
I'd still come back and see the last half of the game or whatever, but I always found like, it's Super Bowl, no one's going to be fishing. This is the perfect time. And so I'd go and freeze and barely catch any fish. One time I fell in and went for a swim on Super Bowl.
I continued that when I moved to New York. I used to fish for stripers on my last day was always Christmas Eve day. And then it got to a point where it was like, it took me 45 minutes to get suited up. I'd go fish for 30 minutes. And it took me 35 minutes to, take everything off. And I was like, this is probably not worth it. But it was just fun to kind of have an end of season ritual,
Yeah. Your fishing in New York's one of the things I wanted to talk about. I really love those portions of your book. I think I've fished some of those same places. I don't fish there a lot. I don't live there like you, but we know some of the same people.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's amazing that you have so much fishing right in one of the most densely populated cities in the whole country. It's fascinating.
Totally surprising to me too. I moved there to take a job at Sports Afield to start my career or whatever, and I thought I was giving it all up. I thought like all the time I'd spent in the woods and fishing, I thought it was like I was giving it up for the career. Right. I found the Catskills first just because I was a trout guy, which is 2.5 hours away. Madly in love with that, but it took like 5 years for me to actually discover that literally right there, a stone's throw from where I live was really good fishing, and it's like, I don't like to talk about it. I'm reluctant to talk about it a little bit because I don't want a whole lot of other people to figure it out, but it's remarkably good actually. And it's about an 8-month season. In the spring, the stripers are coming up from the Chesapeake, and the summer in the Hudson, and they're kind of on their migration, can be great. Bluefish too. Summer, we go a little further out east and hit some striper flats, which I love doing, which is every bit as fun as bone fishing, I feel like.
Oh, yeah.
And then the fall, of course, is when everything quickens, it's so awesome. You got the big stripers coming. They're all fat because they've been eating all summer, and they're coming back. And then you've got the bonito come, and then the false albacore, mix in some bluefish. Recently, last couple of years, we've had bluefin tuna come almost within casting range.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
So it's this crazy, and it's also just really fun. I mean, you go out there, where I fish, there are not too many fly fishermen. It's mainly bait and spinner guys, and it's kind of like, I call it the UN, because there's a whole bunch of Chinese fellows over here and some Russian guys and some guys from Germany. I mean, it's like this kind of like crazy mix of people. It's almost like riding a New York subway, right? Which is initially how I used to get out there, actually, which was always interesting.
That's what I was going to say. You can take a subway right to where you're fishing.
You can. It's funny because you leave at early morning and you're with all the clubbers are coming back, and then there's the homeless dude who's been on the train all night, and it's you with all your fishing gear. And then on the way back, your waders are dripping out of your backpack, and people are kind of looking at you kind of funny. So, yeah,
I haven't fished too many of those jetties in the city, but I've fished the jetties in New Jersey. There's a couple like that, like the Barnegat jetty.
Yeah.
I've had some crazy experiences out there. It's the same. There's all kinds of people out there, right?
Yeah, it's very funny. I mean, you got to always watch out. They're very tall. They're kind of like, look at fly fishermen. They're tolerant of us, which is nice, right? They're kind of fascinated, actually. Like, why would you do that? But you always got to be careful on your back cast. You don't hook somebody. You're trying to clear out a little space. You're always watching your back cast.
They're like, isn't this hard enough? Do you really have to make it harder?
And then they're always really, when you catch, when the false albacore come in and all those guys are all hooked up and you finally hook one, they're all like, yeah, man, you got, the fly guy got one. They're always like, they're pretty supportive.
If the little guy can do it, so can I.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. One of your New York City stories, I think the chapter was called My Spot Burned.
Yep.
And I thought that was, that had a pretty big impact on me because I've run into, it was a very subtle message in that chapter. And I've run into this several times in the magazine business where there's a huge flood in North Carolina. Hurricane Helene comes through and wrecks everything. And we're going to do a story on, what's the comeback of the trout fishery? And it seems a little, I don't know. Something doesn't seem right about it because although, fly fishing's a passion, you see all these wrecked homes and stuff. Is it really that important? Because it kind of puts the fishing in perspective. Absolutely. And I really appreciated that. And, we see this every year. It's happening in Texas right now. Yep. It's like, the river got wrecked, but it's kind of the least important thing.
100%. And I never forget that feeling I had. And I wrote about this in that piece of finally waiting a couple weeks or whatever, but finally going out, deciding one morning, early morning to go out and walking out there and just looking around and being like, this does not feel appropriate, for me to be out here doing this when there's like suffering all around me, and I remember just like packing up right away and going back. And it's the least important thing, really. It really does kind of put things in perspective, but on the other hand, it does help heal. You want to get back to doing things that are normal, and there is a healing aspect to it, I feel like, as well. So
it's true. You have to balance everything. Like when Hurricane Dorian went through the Bahamas, that place was just razed to the ground. But part of their recovery was trying to get the fishing back going, so the guides could get to work and get some income, and they can put their lives back together. And in their case, bone fishing is like a key ingredient to putting their lives back together. You can't do it without it.
That came back faster than, they were doing that before they even got to fixing Marsh Harbor, to the city, to the town there. Everything was still down, but they were bone fishing because they needed to, generate some revenue. And
are the bonefish here? Yes. Okay. Right. Then we can rebuild because there's a little economy. So there's some good news in that. But yeah, sometimes the fly fishing just makes you look at the big picture, and
absolutely
thought that was pretty cool. But another part of your book is hatches. You talked about chasing the sulfur hatch and the green drake hatch. What's your favorite?
Ooh, that's a great question.
In terms of chasing hatches, like what do you really like to chase?
There's something still about the green drake, which has years when it doesn't really happen, or at least I'm not there when it happens. But when it does happen, and you have a little window when you got you can fish the big duns, which is awesome. But then when the coffin flies come, it is to me that's like the quintessential Catskills experience, is to see these big white. You don't even know they're around, and then you just happen to look. Oh my! And they're like thousands in the sky, right? And you're like, please fall, because when they fall, it's like this. It's mayhem, and they're so cool looking. They're just like these big white crosses, flying up in the air. So and like I said, sometimes I go up there and they don't happen, or sometimes they just stay up there and they don't fall. So there's it's a little bit like, because they're scarce and because they don't happen all the time, maybe that's the one that's so special. But there's no doubt that the sulfur hatch is the main hatch, right? You gotta love sulfurs. You gotta figure out how to fish them, because if you don't, you're gonna have a hard time in the East. I feel like it's just such a great hatch, especially in the Catskills.
And that way, your book and just fly fishing in general is about chasing things all over the place. Absolutely. Chasing the Atlantic salmon, chasing the hatches, chasing striped bass. Outsiders think they're completely separate things, but timing things perfectly and just hitting it dead on, even if you miss 9 times, but that one time you hit it dead on, makes it all worth it.
It's cool. Fishing is very much about chasing things. It's very much like how you kind of interact with it's a way for us to interact in this natural world, whether it's a migration. You in your own way play a role in a migration if you're fishing for stripers. Like this is, I forget, I think David Benedetto wrote about this in On the Run. When that migration of fish, that body of fish, those stripers and the bonito and false albacore and bluefish go off of Montauk, I think it's the largest biomass of any sort of migration in the world. And so you get to kind of play a role in that. And it's a silly role, right? You're just fishing for them or whatever, but there is something kind of atavistic about that, right? That's like what our ancestors did. Migrations were a big deal. That's how they hunted. That's how they figured out how to feed their tribes and their families. So it's a cool thing to kind of, I think it's atavistic. I think it's within us somewhere. We feel it. It's not necessarily, you can't really explain it, but it's sort of there.
Yeah. Interestingly, I was out on the Susquehanna River this weekend at this site where there's Native American petroglyphs.
Yep.
And a lot of people say they're snakes, but they're eels.
Eels, yeah.
They're carvings, eels. And that 3,000 years ago, they were out there on those rocks.
Absolutely.
Getting those eels, leaving their mark on the rock, saying this is the place for eels. Yep. And it's cool to just be out there where, they went to like meet the eel run.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, they're playing the role in the migration there, right? That's a great example.
Yeah. I mean, we're in the American West, the bison, and I think it's the same sort of thing, whether you're, going for the sockeye migration in Bristol Bay or hitting that striper run. I've never heard that called the biggest biomass migration, but that's
got to fact check me on that. But I think it actually makes sense if you think about it, because it's not only those big predator fish; it's also all the bait. I mean, the
must
bait
be all the menhaden
astounding.
too, yeah.
It's like not just the menhaden either; it's all silver sides and and then the snappers who are also eating all the stuff. I mean, so it makes some sense. I'll have to call David and double check on that. But
yeah, I mean, there's acres and acres and acres going for miles up the shore when that's happening. It's really quite a thing to witness.
Yeah.
Reading your book, I also got the impression that you and I know a lot of the same people. You told a funny story about Yvon Chouinard.
Yeah.
Can you share that with me? Because I laughed my ass off when I read that one.
Actually, I had to introduce Yvon. I was a MC to Atlantic Salmon Federation dinner, and he was being honored. And so I decided, I didn't know if it was PC or whatever, but I was like, I'm going to tell this story. And I told it, and I remember him walking up and just shaking his head, like giving me like a faux punch to the stomach, But I was lucky enough to be on a trip with Bill Taylor, and who was the head of the ASF, and Yvon, and we were up in Labrador. And it was just like, it was an awesome trip. But we had one really tough day on this river called the Pinware. And it was like raining and like cold and nasty. And the three of us fished, just continuously. There were salmon, blooping and leaping and all around us, but we could not hook up. And suddenly out of the kind of piney woods came this duo. And it turned out to be a father-son. And the younger of the duo would like place the older man kind of in the right place to cast, and then sort of stood on his non-casting shoulder and was giving him instructions. And he made like 3 casts, I think. Rod bent, jumping salmon, all this sort of stuff. We're just kind of watching this thing, and he brings it in, and the man doesn't look down. And the younger man picks it up, and the older man kind of puts his, feels the fish or whatever, they release it. And then we're all kind of shaking our heads. And then, about 5 minutes later, he hooks another salmon, same routine or whatever. And then they just go and like disappear into the mist, right? And so we keep fishing for like 3 hours, 3 of us, and don't even hook a fish, like nothing. Go back to the lodge, have dinner. Everybody's just worn out. We have like black fly bites all over us too, stuff like that. And Yvon, sort of is looking at this bottle of beer, and he sort of clears his throat, and we all kind of, turn and listen to him like E.F. Hutton. And he's like, man, I tried everything. I tried, riffling hitch. I tried a dry fly. I tried to, strip in the thing, and I just couldn't catch a fish. And we're all like, yeah, man, same thing. And we sort of started giggling a little bit. And then at one point he kind of like, as the giggling subsided, he goes, I even tried some cast with my eyes closed. This was a blind man actually who was catching fish. I forgot to mention that part, but he said, I even tried some with my eyes closed. And literally I had some beer in my mouth, and it went like, came out of my nose. Like it was because it was like perfectly, we were all exhausted and just beaten up, and it was like a perfect, anyway, he was hilarious.
Sharp wit on that guy. It's pretty funny. That guy must what, his son could see the fish or something? Was it a sight fishing situation?
No, I mean, they were just all around, and I don't know what it is. It's maybe, I don't know. My wife has fished for Atlantic salmon 5 times, and she's caught fish on 3 of those times. So it's like some people just have it, right? And maybe this guy was just in touch with other senses. I don't really know because he was blind. I have no idea. I wish
he's blind. He had karma.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I was happy for him. A couple days later, I was like, oh, that's great. Of course, that day I was like, God, how'd that guy catch the fish? But
where's the best place you've fished for Atlantic salmon? Like, what's the pinnacle? You've fished a lot of these places, even in Russia.
I'm not as lucky as some guys. I go as a journalist. I go as what Tom McGuane called us sponges. We get invited along on these trips, and we're sort of put in the smallest room and all kinds of stuff. But no, I've been very lucky. I've fished all of the Gas Bay Peninsula, and I've actually got a cabin now in the Margaree, which is a public river in Nova Scotia, which I love.
Beautiful river.
It's great. I love it up there. It's been a little tough fishing the last couple of years, but I would have to say, Labrador is amazing, right? In North America, Labrador is probably where the healthiest runs are. But Russia, by far. I was lucky enough when I was at Forbes to get assigned to do a story on this kind of reclusive British billionaire who owned. He had a 99-year lease on these 4 rivers actually, up in the Kola Peninsula, which is the far western part of Russia. And James Prozek got an assignment from the New York Times to do the same story. So we were on the same trip together, which was awesome. James Prozek, the artist and author.
Yep.
And that was just like the whole trip seemed like a fever dream. I even, as I was there, it felt like I wasn't really there. And, it's just like, it felt like an outer body experience, the whole thing. Plus you're exhausted and drinking a lot of vodka. But that was amazing. That was just, plentiful fish, huge fish, 30 pounders were not uncommon. I wrote about, there was a fish I hooked on my last, you could fish all night, right? I mean, it was like an hour of darkness maybe. I remember going out, my last night I went out at 3 a.m. with the photographer. And he went way up river, and I stood in one spot and hooked this fish. And it's the typical thing, like, my line just stopped, and I was like, oh, shit. And I just went like that, and it wasn't moving at all. And I was like, I must have hooked a rock. And I was like trying to break it off so I could keep fishing. And then all of a sudden the rock just started moving, and you could hear your line whirring, and then jumped out of the water. It's the biggest salmon I've ever seen. I didn't catch it. I broke my rod and had all kinds of other calamities. But yeah, I mean, Russia was just kind of, again, like a fever dream. I just don't even, I don't quite remember actually being there. It felt like I was always like 10 feet above me watching me do all of this,
I guess those lodges are right now, do you know the status? They're open, people are fishing there, but not Americans?
Correct.
Is that what's happening?
Correct, yep. There's a guy I know who owns I've met him once, but he owns those lodges now, and he frequently posts pictures of, the untrammeled waters in which he's fishing.
Fishing's still there.
The fish are still there,
good,
right?
presumably. If you say on private water, I'm sure some of the places without protection, maybe they're getting poached and stuff like that.
This guy had a lot of problems with poachers, actually. He really cleaned it up. He had it wasn't unusual to be like fishing in a river and all of a sudden see a guy walk by with a Kalashnikov, the big Russian machine gun. You're like, oh, he's looking for poachers. He'd be like, oh, God. So that was cool, very cool. I'd love to do that again. It'll never happen probably, but it would be wonderful to do it again.
Yeah, there's got to be some big changes before we can get back to Russia.
Yep.
I haven't fished for salmon in Russia, but I've been to Kamchatka before, and that's pretty
I've always
cool
wanted to do that too. Yeah.
For trout, not as cool as the big salmon, but that's always been a dream of mine.
Yeah.
I haven't done too much Atlantic salmon. I'm from Western Canada, so kind of a steelhead guy.
Yep. Very similar.
But I have tried it, and I think the mindset and everything's very, very similar.
Definitely, and it's not for everybody. And I took my best, my best fishing buddy's a guy I go to the Catskills with, and we've been bone fishing and stuff like that. And I took him up to fish for Atlantic salmon, and he just was not into it. And our mutual friend Tom Rosenbauer doesn't like it very much either. Neither does Andy Mill, actually. It's not for everyone. You kind of have to have like it's repetitive, and it's not very fruitful. It takes a long time to get. Even if they're hard to catch, they're hard to hook. But Chouinard described it the best. He likened it to blacksmithing, kind of like this, repetitive motion. Then he even said it felt like he was stoned. That's kind of what it feels like. So, it does. You have to have a certain mindset of like unbelievable patience, or McGuane once said that salmon anglers have large bank accounts and room temperature IQs.
I like that blacksmith analogy, though. It is super repetitive.
It's totally, and then especially if you do the double hander, thing, then it becomes like this. That's kind of fun because it adds a little element to the whole thing that you're doing something probably a little bit newish and trying to figure it out. So it's kind of like a fun way to pass the time.
I like the repetitiveness of the casting.
Same.
And with the steelhead and stuff, but I like to move. I don't mind. I can keep casting all the time. But I got to move my feet.
Yeah, same. Well, we do this in Nova Scotia in particular. You work a pool. So you start at the top, you cast, and then you take a step down, and you just work that whole pool. And then you can get up and do it again, or you can move to another pool. But yeah, I agree with you. Standing in one spot, which is what they do in Newfoundland, by the way. They'll stand in one spot ugly. For hours. Yeah,
and in my limited Atlantic salmon experience, sometimes the fish are just in like one spot. Like there's really just a bucket, and the rest of it you're really wasting your time. You can
practice.
You can move your feet, but the fish are right there, and you can see them. Yeah. That's kind of what I like about steelheading. The rivers are bigger. You can't see what's going on there, and
there are plenty of rivers.
I can keep the anticipation.
Yeah, there's rivers. I mean, the Margarie's not very clear. You don't really know where they are. So it's kind of fun. Yeah, you're like every cast has a shot. You think anyway?
Yeah, and I love that. I know some people sight fishing is the pinnacle, and sight fishing is cool too. Don't get me wrong, but I like blind casting and just like that feeling like maybe the next one. Yeah. I like being surprised.
Same. And
I have
you are
no problem with being surprised.
I'm always surprised, right? Always. I mean, so sometimes you make a cast, you're like, that one might work. Rarely does it, right? And then you'll just be thinking about something else, and you'll lay it out there, and it's just this shock. It's this crazy cool shock. You're like, I didn't think there was a fish there, and then there they are.
On the other hand, when I'm sight fishing, sometimes I'm surprised too. You make what you think's a great one, they don't eat it, and then next thing you know, the tarpon just turns on, eats one from his tail.
Yeah. I'm surprised when any tarpon takes any cast I make, actually, still, so.
Yeah, they are tough fish. For me, it was tough this year. That's the other thing. You've done a lot of tarpon fishing. Like you wrote the best book on tarpon fishing. Well, Andy's book's pretty good too. But about the people, like Lords of the Fly, about the characters and the people involved in that. That was absolutely brilliant. And you've interviewed and rubbed shoulders with like the tarpon greats of all time.
That was great. I actually haven't fished that much for tarpon. Actually, I fish once a year, right? I mean, I just interviewed a guy who, I won't mention his name, but he books 240 days a year or something like that, tarpon fishing. So I'm a little bit under that. I do about 3 days a year. But yeah, I mean, that book was so fun just because it was such an excuse. And I was just, as I was talking about earlier, how much I love the history of the sport. Like I was just such a junkie about reading all this stuff when I was like, starting at age 12. And I got to meet all these guys, and it was just so cool to knock on Stu App's door and have him come to the door and, sit down. And we had a great long interview. We had about a 5-hour interview, but we took a halftime in the middle so he could take a nap. So I just kind of hung out with his girlfriend and
really
chilled out. Yeah, it was really fun. But then like Chico and Flip Pallet made me a buffalo burger as we sat out in the kind of the rain and talked about all this stuff. And then to be on Steve Huff's boat and to hang out with Tom Evans. I mean, it was pretty unbelievable.
All of the greats.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, some of them weren't still. Billy Pate wasn't still alive. I wish I'd gotten the chance to hang out with him, but
I really enjoyed the chapter on Lefty, and what I loved about it is you were so dead on, like just journalist to journalist. Spot on, man. Like I've been to his house dozens and dozens and dozens of times and did all that stuff. And the way you described it was absolutely perfect. Like,
thank you.
You just nailed it to a T.
He's so funny.
All his quirks, his home he lived in, the organization, the place that you go to cast.
The reels. I'm sure you saw the reels in the basement.
Oh yeah.
Love that. And I love, so I open up, I sort of open up with something else because I didn't want to open up with the first thing he does is take you to his little, he would take you to his little pond, which he had hand scythed down a little opening in the weeds so he could cast. It had a little fountain in the middle. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And he would take you there and he would, it was basically sort of a humiliation exercise because he'd say, cast as far as you can. And, double haul. And I thought I got it out there pretty well. And he was like, he had his little quips. Like, did you look at your back cast? Like, no, he goes, the good things that look like crap. Anyway, but then he, this little guy who was, I'm probably almost double his size. At the time, I think he was double my age, with one cast, one haul, and then one haul like that. The whole thing goes out, right? And to the point where it pulls his arm, So he had this whole sort of, and then from that point on, he taught me how to do that, which was amazing. When I subsequently went back and I sort of looked up some old articles, maybe ones that you've written, I realized he did that with every journalist, and he did it with just about anyone else he did. So I had to rejigger my opening. I was going to open up the story the way that 5 other people had already opened up the story with Lefty, but it was so cool to hang out with him. I loved visiting his house. I loved the tarpon that was, above his sofa in his living room. I loved how neat he was. I loved all of his. Remember, he had all his boxes of great grain cereal. I mean, and I'd be, why do you have 25 boxes of great grain cereal? He childhood depression, Mm-hmm. So he
stockpiled everything.
He stockpiled everything, and his little quips too. I mean, I drove around in his car. He had this great quip about his bald head. He said, "It's not a bald head; it's a solar panel for a love machine." And in his car, he had this little armrest. He had made this little foam armrest, and then he had a orange bobber on the top of his antenna there so he could figure out where his car was in the parking lot, and a Louis L'Amour paperback, which he would read at stop signs, stoplights. It was just like, it was so cool. I loved hanging out with him. I loved it. It was so fun.
It was a nice table setter for me for the whole book because everything in it, that chapter was 100% accurate. Yep. So as a reader, it just really helped me trust you because then I'm like, okay, everybody else he's talking about, I know it's dead on because It was a perfect portrait of,
Thank you. It was so fun to do. It was so fun.
What a character. Like even the armrest story in there, I rode in that car right after he bought it. Like, I think it was a Forerunner.
The Forerunner, and it was a stick shift, remember?
Yeah, and who buys that and instantly modifies, like glues, use contact cement and glues a foam armrest on it? He's altering everything.
I didn't put this in the story, but we went to eat at this place, and it was great because he always had everything really burned. So he had this like burned French fry, and he was like teaching me how to cast with this burned French fry in the middle of his restaurant, which was awesome. But as we were leaving, he like put it in kind of had the clutch on and was in neutral, and we were drifting in. There's a highway there, like a 4-lane highway. And he was talking to me like this as we were drifting in like that. And my eyes, I was watching all these cars go like that. And then he like put the brakes on at the last minute, and he gave me that big gap tooth smile. You know, he was like, because he knew exactly what he was doing. It was so funny. You know, anyway, he was great.
Great he was like a real athlete and great peripheral. You know, he could cast but not look, and just everything would go on.
And he was a righty.
Yep.
He used to be a lefty, and then he flipped a mattress for his wife and tore the bicep in his left arm, so he started casting righty. Great basketball player.
Is that what happened? I didn't know that.
Yep.
Yeah. I knew he was a basketball coach. In fact, I have a friend, Heather. He was her mom's basketball coach in Frederick, Maryland.
Yep. Yeah. He was a real gem. It's been hard to replace him, I feel like, you know, he's irreplaceable, really. But I feel like I've thought about this a little bit too, because someone asked me the other day, is there a new Lefty Kreh? And I don't think there ever will be another Lefty Kreh. You can't replace him. But I think if you took some kind of combination of like Andy Mill and maybe Tom Rosenbauer and like mashed them together, you would have something that sort of, you know, gets there a little bit. Tom kind of does the how-to stuff, and Andy does the sort of promotion of the sport kind of thing that Lefty used to do kind of seamlessly in the same body, sort of. So, you know.
I love that. Yeah, you could definitely put that together. Andy's got the charisma. Not that Tom doesn't, but yeah, he did a lot of things and did them very well. But he's not replaceable because you have to put him in a time frame too. He was at a time when all of fly fishing was changing and new things were happening, and something you can't repeat. You can't discover fly fishing twice. I mean, we're doing little tweaks now with, you know, Euro nymphing or little things that come along, but like he was right there when the sport as we know it came about. He was doing the
quantum leaps, and now the leaps seem kind of incremental, but he was part of that quantum stuff, you know, back then.
Yeah, and very public about it, whereas some of these great fishermen like Steve Huff, who you wrote about, you know, he's a guide. He's one-on-one. He's not going to ever
He's not going to fly fishing shows.
Yeah.
Like that.
Or writing books and just reaching tens of thousands of people at one time. Just sort of being more selective with his expertise. Yeah. But you got to fish with him. That's pretty cool.
Very cool. With Steve or with
Steve Huff?
Oh yeah. No,
Did you fish with Lefty?
We didn't fish. No, we just casted that day. I wish I had. He was going to some trip, and he's like, "There's an opening," and I just couldn't make it happen. I mean, I would have loved to have gone. Apparently, he was great to fish with. He would, at that point, was just sitting he would sit on the bow, but then he always took his patented 20-minute nap, you know, where he would lie down in the bottom of the boat and fall asleep for 20 minutes and wake back up, you know.
Yeah, I only fished with Lefty one time. We went trout fishing. It wasn't saltwater fishing, but trout fishing was fun.
Yeah.
Still a master at that too.
Yeah, he started. Smallmouth was his
naps.
His first love was smallmouth. You know, so.
But what was it like fishing with Steve Huff?
It's amazing. I still do it, believe it or not. He's going to turn 80, I think, in December. I'm not sure. We went this past May. It is, you know, don't tell my wife or kids, but it's one of the things I look forward to most in the calendar year. We do 3 days in the Everglades, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, I love everything about it. I obviously love the fishing part is really fun, but I like just hanging out with him. Like he's just a cool, interesting guy. He likes to read books. You know, we just have great chats on the boat, and then I actually stay with him and his wife, and she makes these great dinners and stuff. So it's just wonderful sort of 3 days that I get to do every year, where
That's
I have
amazing.
very little responsibilities except for trying to catch a 120-pound tarpon. You know.
So are you in the Everglades City area or Chokoloskee?
Yeah. So one thing that's so cool, so he lives in Everglades City now. He moved there. I think he got sick of the Keys in like the late 90s and moved over there. And it's still kind of an outpost town, you know. I mean, there's a very few frontier towns left in Florida, and I feel like Everglades City and Chokoloskee still are, mainly because there's no good beaches and the mosquitoes pretty big and hungry.
They're real.
But with Steve, you stay at Steve's. I stay at Steve's house, and then he actually trailers his boat down to Chokoloskee, and we launch out of Ted Jurassic's boat ramp. Ted Jurassic is the founder of Tibor, and you usually don't see him in the morning. We're launching at 7 or 7:30, but at the end of the day, whenever we come back to the dock, Steve likes to fish late too, so we're usually coming back at 6 o'clock or something like that. And but Ted always comes out and shoots the bull with us, and I'm always making sure that he knows that I'm using one of his reels, and it's just cool to have these two legends who are, what a privilege to just listen to these two guys talk, and they're old buddies, and they're hilarious. They're both great with their hands, good at fixing kind of mechanical problems, and so that's really cool. Yeah, I just treasure that trip.
What was the fishing like this year?
This year was actually better than it's been. So I forget the name of the hurricane. There was the big hurricane down there a couple of years, 2019 or something like that, which completely changed the fishing down there. Previous to that, it was mainly laid up fish. You probably get 10 to 20, depending on the day, shots at a laid up fish, tarpon, which is my favorite. It's just knee buckling. You spot this fish, this cylinder of silver in the water. You got to figure out if the tail's not sticking out. You got to figure out where's the head, where's the tail, and then you have to make the cast there's the old Andy Mills. He says, show the fish the fly without him seeing it, which makes absolutely no sense if you think about it, but it does make sense, actually. That's what you're trying to do. So you're trying to throw it 4 inches in front of his face. If it's too far out, they can't see it. If it's closer than that, you spook them. So it's super fun, super challenging. But after that hurricane, it got really muddy in there, and they dropped all this mud on top of the grasses, so there's not a lot of the water's less clear. So now it's a very different type. We do more point fishing, sort of more traditional, for swimming fish and stuff like that. But this year was pretty good.
Point fishing, out on a point where they come around a corner or
he'll
something.
Stake out on a point, and we'll just stare at this one spot, and hopefully every 5 to 20 minutes something comes by, and you got to make a perfect cast there too. But so it's a different type. Very 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 few laid up fish. So it's just different. But this year we saw more fish than we'd seen in a long time. So that was good.
I was in the Keys in May, and we saw a lot of fish.
Yeah.
Fishing wasn't good. We had good weather.
Yep.
There's a lot of fish, but sometimes even then it doesn't happen.
Were you on the ocean side?
Well, both. We went back and forth. We saw tons of fish on the ocean side. Of course, they wouldn't eat.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
We had our best chances on the bay side, I think.
Yep.
But it was cool. It's always good to be down there. I got to spend a little time with Andy.
Oh, good. Yeah,
And
I
his
love
son.
being down there. Yep. I just love seeing those fish. Honestly, I mean, you want to catch them, you want to hook them, but they're so cool to see. Just these huge beasts on this shallow water. It's just such an awesome thing.
Yeah. And you see there's so much going on. It's not just the tarpon. I almost get mesmerized just looking at all the starfish and everything else that's going on. That's why I like polling. I like keeping moving and seeing new stuff all the time.
Yep.
Just staking up and looking at a spot for a long time would be very hard. I'm a little
It'd be good if there's a lot of fish, then that's fine. But if there's not a lot of fish, that's you really have to struggle because you got to stay ready.
Got to concentrate.
You got to concentrate because if you don't, you're going to blow that one chance you get. But it's hard to do that. You start thinking about your mortgage and all the other things that invade your brain.
Yeah. And that also invades some very good trout fishing time of year. Why does May have to be so complicated?
Or June. I've always thought, I wish there was there was a famous quote. Hemingway had a quote about how October was awesome. And then somebody else had this quote, I wish there were 10. I forget who it is. Anyway, someone said, I wish there were 10 Octobers, and I wish there were 5 Octobers and 5 Junes, and the other 2 months I could do whatever. But I love June. May and June are just so good everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to figure out where to go. It's hard to divvy up your time. And I feel like the same thing with October. I mean, it's October, I want to be home, but I also want to go back up to the Marguerite, and there's a good push of salmon that come in there. It's kind of hard not to want to do that too, or go out to Montana,
And when do you do that, Marguerite?
So the Marguerite has traditionally two runs. So they have a spring run. They call it a spring run. It starts in June. And I go up there for, the latter part of June and the early part of July. And then it has another push of fish that come in the fall. So, October-ish.
And they're still silver?
They are sort of silver. I mean, they got this beautiful, they're like a shiny penny. Like they're not like old dark fish that have been there forever, but they're beautiful. They've got this beautiful kind of bronze sheen on their backs. That's in the Marguerite. A couple of the rivers up there have totally fresh runs that are completely silver. Yeah, I mean, like,
Are they a little more grabby than in the spring, or about the same?
They can be because they're the spawn is coming very soon, so they can be. Again, it all dependent on water, all depending on luck. The runs on the Marguerite. Sometimes they've not happened quite in October. They've waited till November to come through when no one can angle for them. So, it's always like any type of Atlantic salmon fishing, it's a little hit or miss.
Yeah. And that's in Newfoundland or
Nova Scotia.
Marguerite? Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Nova Scotia, yeah. Where the season's open until October 31st.
So do you go back to the Gaspé anymore? Or?
It's been I think for the last 10 years, I've just done all my, just used all my salmon capital in Nova Scotia. I haven't fished anywhere else. But prior to that, went to those other places. And
have you dipped into the striped bass fishing up there in Canada? Have you really?
You kind of can't help it a little bit. They're in the rivers now, right? So I would say in the last 2 years, I've caught more stripers on the river than I have salmon. So they can be everywhere. And then, I take the kids in the summer. I'll fish in the morning and then come back and grab everybody and we'll go do some adventure. And there's great beaches up there. And I'll always bring my 8-weight down there, and you can sight fish stripers or just blind cast. And they're schoolies. They're not like anything huge where I am. But some of the striper fishing up there is unbelievable. Like, just 30-pounders. And
yeah, I'm seeing stories and seeing great images of like flats fishing, sort of like, Monomoy Flats kind of stuff with 25-pound stripers on them. And
it's funny. I love stripers where I am now. Obviously, when I'm up in Canada, the stripers kind of drive me crazy because they're not helping the salmon population. They're eating a lot of the young of the year salmon and salmon fry. So it's an odd thing to have in my same head, this sort of love of a species in one place and a disgust of them in another place.
It's a crazy conflict, right? Because historically, they both existed together, so you can't really blame the striped bass. No. But when there's an imbalance,
and there's a major imbalance. My ultimate goal, I tried to talk ASF into doing this, tongue in cheek here, but I said, let's just go net, because they have too many. So I was like, let's go net their fish and bring them down to us, in the Mid-Atlantic area where their stripers are kind of hurting a little bit. So
yeah,
that was
But they're completely, from what I understand, two completely distinct
completely.
populations.
I thought they were the same forever, but they're not. They're not. Most of those Canadian fish they spawn like kind of around in the Baie de Chaleur or Miramichi area, and then they kind of spread out, all over the Gaspé and all the way to Nova Scotia. And then ours are totally different.
They're just all sort of St. Lawrence Seaway striped bass, and they just stay there.
Yep.
But somehow for decades I thought,
Same.
Oh, those fish must go all the way down to South Carolina in the wintertime.
I thought the same thing.
But where would they go in the winter? They don't just stay in Canada, do they?
They do stay in Canada. I don't. They, I think, go offshore and hunker down somewhere, or they go up the rivers. I guess they're in the rivers at that point.
Offshore makes sense.
Yeah, I don't actually know what they do in the winter up there. I know what ours do, but I don't know what theirs do.
But very tough for Atlantic salmon to the little fry to survive. Like you look at pictures of the Miramichi, there's miles where there's just stripers boiling everywhere.
No, it's really sad. And like you said, it's about an imbalance thing. It's like when they're in balance, fish species are resilient. They can figure it out. But, and all fish species have boom and bust cycles. We just don't want to put too much pressure on them when they're in the bust cycle. And I feel like we, for Atlantic salmon, for a number of reasons, we put a lot of pressure on them. We, meaning humans, but also, with other species, stuff like that. There's been a lot of pressure on them in that bust cycle, which is never good, because then you get to a point where, God forbid, but you could get to a point of no return at some point. So
kind of reminds me of like on the West Coast with steelhead, you build the dams and then the sea lions are eating all the steelhead right at the bottoms of the dam. It's like those two species evolved together. They should be together, but we're creating a very tricky situation for the fish to even survive.
The good news is that these species are, look at tarpon, for instance. I mean, they are incredibly resilient. Which is the good news, knock on wood. But tarpon been around for 50 million years, and they've seen everything, ice ages and horrible heat and human activity, and they've just continued to sort of be around. So knock on wood, that's the good news. Where's the wood? There it is.
The more we learn about them, the more fascinating they become too. Like the ones out in Africa, and are they connected?
Yep.
Like the science behind these species is fascinating.
It is. I love that. So I was looked into for Lords of Fire. Looked into because they don't really know where tarpon. Once tarpon leave the shallow water, they're not exactly sure still where they go. They go to the deep ocean, which we know zero about. Right? We know more about Mars than we do about the deepest part of the oceans. And they leave at a certain point when the moon, there's a high pressure thing, and then they dive. All we know is that they go out the deep part of the ocean and then they dive. And the theory is that high pressure system and the pressure of diving like that expels their eggs, and that's how they spawn. That's the theory anyway, which I just love. I think that's the coolest thing. Yeah.
Almost like squeezing the eggs out of them?
Kind of, yeah, kind of. But I also love not knowing everything about them is kind of cool too. I feel like it's good to have a little mystery. It feels like we try to know everything about everything now, and it's kind of fun to have just a little tiny bit of mystery, I think, as long as we can protect them, I think.
Yeah. But then the fertilized eggs of the tarpon, they drift up into the mangroves. Is that right?
They sure do. Yep.
And they could just drift anywhere into Africa or Costa Rica.
Same with the bonefish. I mean, they figured out those eggs drift from like Cuba and come all the way. But yeah, the tarpon are reared pretty much in these mangrove places which have low oxygen, which is one of the reasons that they are air breathers. Whenever you see a tarpon roll and you hear that little bloop sound, they're taking in air. Which I've always loved about them too. They seem to me to be sort of maybe like the missing link between like sea and land dwellers to a certain degree. I mean, this is a fish that gulps air, kind of cool.
It's very cool. The only other fish I've seen do that is arapaima.
Yep, which seem related to tarpon. I'm not sure if they are, but they're similar.
Their heads, the way they gulp air is very similar. Their heads very similar.
Yep.
It seems easy to believe that hundreds of millions of years ago or something, they were related.
Split off somewhere. Yep.
But you got to do it if you're going to survive in 90-degree water, basically what it boils down to. There's no gills are not going to do it. Yep. So tell me a little bit about you right now. Do you still work for Forbes?
I'm a contributing editor. Okay. So I sort of, after the Nick Saban book came out, I decided to go kind of full-time into writing books and doing some freelance articles on the side. That happened to be at the time when they were pushing really hardcore into digital stuff. So I was editing a magazine called Forbes FYI, and I was a staff writer at the magazine, and I had to get I forgot what it was, 250,000 uniques or something like that on my blog, and it was just not where I saw my career going. I didn't really want to be a blogger. So that was a good time to kind of launch off. But I think it's been 5 years since I've written a story for the magazine there, but they asked me to do 2 blogs a year. So do a couple blog posts. So contributing editor there.
People can find you there.
You can, yeah, sure.
And do you have your own website for the books?
I do. My new 2, the Rivers Always Reach the Sea, and then my one coming out in January are not on the website now. I'm trying to get on my website guide to get them up there, but they'll be up soon, I think. So.
What is the new book?
It's another college football book.
What's that about?
It's about, are you a college football fan? Sort of.
On the margins.
Do you remember when Pete Carroll?
I live in Penn State land.
That's right.
So
yeah, you got to know.
Everything
know
about
something.
Penn State, I hear it.
So when Pete Carroll, who is now the coach of the Raiders and was the coach of the Seahawks, when he was at USC, they had this 9-year era where it was just completely fascinating. He was a beaten up failure as a coach who took over a beaten up failure program and built it way up, and they won national titles, and then they played what some consider to be the greatest college game of all time, against Texas in the Rose Bowl in 2006, and then they had this kind of decline, and then this drop off with this huge scandal. So and they became celebrities. They were Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart in particular were more famous than some of the celebrities who flocked to come see them. They had Snoop Dogg was involved in the program, and Will Ferrell, and it was just this awesome, unique, truly unique period of college football. And it was really fun. Pete Carroll is the diametric opposite of Nick Saban, so it was very fun to write about a coach with a different philosophy.
Opposite in what way?
So Saban is kind of the old school military style coach, authoritarian. Carroll believed there was a different way, believes still, that there's a different way to coach, that you can coach with kind of empathy and love your players and not be this total disciplinarian guy and be kind of a player's coach and and succeed. And prior to USC, that philosophy had completely failed. He was at the Jets. He got fired after a year. Then he went to the Patriots for 3 years. He got fired after those 3 years. So it's really fun one of the central questions of the book is, did USC save Pete Carroll, or did Pete Carroll save USC? So it's kind of like...
He was coach of the Niners, though, right? At some point?
No, he was the defensive coordinator.
Defensive coordinator, okay.
Between the Jets stint, after he got fired, he was 3 years with under George Seifert. At the Niners.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's that. In that time period, I was a big Niners fan and Joe Montana fan, and
Ken Norton Jr. was on that team, and Merton Hanks and Jerry Rice. And,
yeah, that was a good team.
Very good team.
And I knew Pete Carroll was walking the sidelines with a clipboard and stuff,
chewing his gum.
That's going to be an awesome story. How long have you been working on this book?
That's been about 2 years. So I'm still. I'm still fine. I just got the copy edit the other day, so I'm kind of just still, working my way through that. But it comes out in mid-January.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, we'll keep our eyes out for it. Thanks for coming and
of course
talking about the fly fishing books. I love it, and I'm glad we finally had a time to sit down and chat. People want to get a hold of you online at all, can they? Or?
Yeah, of course. I love hearing from people. My website's this is the best way, I guess. My email is right there on the website, so you can. Or I'm not great on social media, but I answer people who DM me. Is that what you call it?
Yeah. So, direct message.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Ross.
Appreciate it.
All right.